I was 17 this summer. Everything shifted. Not a boy, not quite a man, just stuck in that in-between where feelings become sharp and unmanageable, and no one ever says the right thing out loud. My brother's best friend, Trent, had been around since I was 12. He was 20 now, long done with high school football, but still wore the jacket like it mattered. He wasn't just a friend of the family. He felt like furniture, like part of the house. Like gravity, Trent had this effortless way of making space feel warmer. He called my mom ma'am, always brought snacks over without asking, and shouted out the score during video games like we were in a stadium. My brother Colby was the loud one, the funny one. I was the quiet observer, always watching from the side of the couch, controller in hand, smile half-formed. That night in the basement was supposed to be like any other. Colby, Trent, and I. Junk food wrappers crinkling under our feet, the smell of pizza grease in the air, the soft blue glow of the screen painting the room in lazy light. We played a few rounds of that old fighting game Colby always wins at. He elbowed Trent in the ribs when he got too competitive, and Trent laughed like he didn't have a care in the world. He always laughed like that, with his whole chest like nothing had ever hurt him. I felt it then, a strange pull in the space between us. It wasn't new, but it had grown louder lately. Maybe because he'd started looking at me differently. Or maybe I just started noticing the way I looked back. Colby left to pick up more food, mumbling something about fries and milkshakes. The basement door thudded behind him, and just like that, Trent and I were alone. The silence stretched too long. I pretended to scroll through game options, aware of how close he was sitting. He didn't move. Neither did I. "You've gotten taller," he said suddenly, his voice quieter than usual. "You were still a runt last year." "Thanks," I muttered, unsure whether to feel flattered or insulted. He chuckled. "Nah, I mean, you're not a kid anymore." There it was. That shift again. The unsaid hanging heavy in the air, like steam after a shower. I didn't look at him, just stare at the screen like it could explain any of this. We played another round. My thumbs moved, but my mind wasn't in the game. Every time his shoulder brushed mine, I felt it like a ripple through my chest. At one point, his knee tapped against mine. He didn't pull back. I didn't either. It was the first time I'd ever felt that electricity with another guy, and the first time I'd wanted it to keep humming instead of disappearing. He paused the game suddenly. "You okay?" I nodded. "Yeah, just tired." But that wasn't it. I wasn't tired. I was scared of what I was starting to feel, of how easily he could make the world tilt. He leaned back, arms stretched over the back of the couch. He looked relaxed. I was anything but. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Nothing," I lied. He smirked, eyes narrowed slightly, like he knew better. "You're a terrible liar." I swallowed hard, looked away. The room was too quiet again. My heart felt too loud. The sound of the front door opening upstairs saved me from having to answer. Colby called out, and I nearly jumped to my feet. "Fries," he shouted. "An extra ranch like a freak." Trent laughed and stood up like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't just nearly drowned in my own chest trying to make sense of what we weren't saying. I followed them upstairs, still unsure if anything had really changed or if I was the only one who felt it. But deep down, I knew something had shifted in that space between the couch cushions. Something small, something dangerous, and it wasn't going away. Summer had a strange way of stretching moments, making them feel both endless and fleeting. That season, the sun stayed longer in the sky, and so did Trent. Colby picked up a job at the hardware store a few towns over, which meant fewer afternoons spent together. But Trent still came by, at first with Colby, and then more often without him. He'd text me out of nowhere. "You home?" Sometimes he wouldn't even ask. He'd just show up, a bag of chips under one arm, and a crooked grin that made it hard to remember how to breathe. The first time he came when Colby wasn't there, I thought it was a mistake. "He's at work," I said, awkward in the doorway. Trent just shrugged. "I know. Thought I'd hang anyway." "That cool?" I said yes, but it wasn't cool. Not because I didn't want him there, but because I wanted him there too much. We sat in the basement again, controllers in hand, but the game was just noise. I kept catching him watching me, like he was seeing something he hadn't before. He wasn't obvious, but he didn't look away when our eyes met either. That tension, the kind that sat right under the skin, grew thicker every time. One humid afternoon, I was in the pool, trying to swim the heat off. I thought I was alone until I caught movement through the kitchen window. Trent, leaning against the sliding door, watching with that unreadable look he wore when he thought I wasn't paying attention. He came out a minute later, shirtless, a towel slung over his shoulder. "Didn't know you had the place to yourself," he said, slipping into the water like it was nothing. Like we're just friends. Like I wasn't losing my grip on reality. The pool wasn't big, but it felt smaller with him in it. Our shoulders brushed as we floated past each other. Neither of us moved away. "Your brother says you've been quiet lately," he said after a long silence. "Something bothering you?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to say everything was bothering me. Him, this, whatever was growing between us in the spaces no one talked about. But instead I just said, "Not really." He nodded, like he accepted that. But he didn't swim away. That night, I was in my room, trying to fix the broken string on my old guitar. It snapped again, and I groaned under my breath. "You're doing it wrong," Trent said from the doorway. I didn't hear him come up. "Thanks," I said flatly, setting the guitar aside. He walked in, took the guitar from me like he'd done it 1,000 times, and started threading the new string. His fingers moved fast, confident. I watched the way his jaw tightened when he concentrated, the way his arms flexed with small, unconscious effort. "You don't play enough," he said without looking up. "I don't feel like it much lately. You used to play all the time." "Yeah, well, things change." He looked at me then. Really looked. "You have a way of disappearing when people start to see you," he said, handing the guitar back. I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know what he meant. Or maybe I did, and I didn't want to admit it. When our fingers brushed, neither of us moved. He stood, and I thought maybe he'd lean in. I thought maybe this was the moment where everything came undone. But he just looked down at me and said, "You're not a kid anymore, you know." I opened my mouth and closed it. He left without saying goodbye. Later that night, Colby walked into my room holding 2 sodas. "You and Trent been acting weird lately," he said, half joking. I forced a laugh. "You're imagining things." He squinted at me like he wasn't so sure. "All right, whatever. Just don't be dumb, okay?" I nodded, my throat dry. What did he mean by that? Did he see something I hadn't noticed slipping out? Did he know? I laid awake that night, staring at the ceiling, replaying Trent's voice in my head. "You're not a kid anymore." What did that make me now? And what exactly did he see when he looked at me like that? Colby left town for the weekend to visit our cousins in Ohio. I was supposed to go too, but I made up some excuse about having summer homework and a headache. Truthfully, I just didn't want to sit in a cramped car for 6 hours pretending I didn't feel what I felt, pretending I hadn't been unraveling for weeks. I thought I'd spend the weekend alone, quiet, numb, maybe finally breathe. But Trent had other plans. It was late Friday night when he showed up. I was halfway through reheating leftover mac and cheese when I heard the knock. Not the doorbell. Just 3 soft taps. Like a secret. I opened the door, hard in my throat. He stood there holding a bag of sour candy and a bottle of Coke, like we were kids having a sleepover. "Thought you might be bored," he said, stepping in like he belonged there. We ended up in the basement, of course. The TV played some old movie neither of us paid attention to. Trent stretched out on the couch like he was made of the night itself. Casual, comfortable, unaware of the hurricane unraveling inside me. Or maybe he knew. Halfway through the movie, I realized we were closer than usual. His thigh touched mine. Not by accident. The air between us buzzed. I didn't move. "You always watch movies like this?" he asked, his voice low. "Like what?" "All tense. Like you're waiting for something to explode." I didn't answer. Couldn't. His hand rested lightly on my knee. Just for a second. A test. He didn't look at me, but he didn't move away either. I stared straight ahead, heart thudding like a fist in my chest. My skin burned where his hand had been. I swallowed. "Trent." He finally looked at me. His face unreadable. "You don't have to say anything," he said softly. "You don't even have to understand it." And then he leaned in. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't rough. It was gentle, uncertain, like he was giving me time to pull away. But I didn't. Our lips met barely at first. A brush. A breath. Then deeper. He tasted like cinnamon gum and soda, like something dangerous disguised as comfort. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine. I've thought about that more times than I should, he whispered. I couldn't speak. My hands trembled. Every part of me was too full of relief, of shame, of wanting. He sat back and ran a hand through his hair. I should go, he said suddenly. His tone had shifted, like he'd just remembered something, like guilt had stepped into the room. Why? I asked, my voice barely audible. Because Colby's my best friend. He stood up, didn't look at me again. Don't tell him, he said, already at the stairs. It's better if you don't. And then he left. Just like that. No explanation. No real goodbye. I sat there on the couch, staring at the pause screen, the movie frozen mid-scene. Everything felt suspended, unfinished. I touched my lips, still warm from his kiss, and felt a strange kind of ache bloom in my chest. I didn't know if I'd just lost something or if I'd finally found something I wasn't ready for. But either way, I knew nothing would be the same again. The days after he left were slow and heavy, like trying to wade through water that kept rising. Trent didn't text, didn't call. He didn't come by, not even when Colby returned and invited him over like nothing had happened. I told myself it didn't mean anything, that the kiss wasn't real, that I'd read it wrong. But my body remembered the way he touched my face. My lips still felt the weight of his. I couldn't eat much, couldn't sleep without dreaming of that night. Sometimes it was soft and golden. Sometimes it shattered me all over again. Colby noticed. He wasn't the most observant brother, but even he could tell something was off. You all right? He asked one afternoon, tossing a soda can in my direction. You've been walking around like you're in a daze. Just tired, I said, the lie already worn out. He had me for a second too long. Trent's been weird too. I tried to keep my face still. What do you mean? I don't know. Distant. Quiet. Not like him. I just nodded and stared at the can in my hands. I started avoiding the basement. I couldn't sit on that couch without seeing him. Couldn't hear the start of that movie without feeling a lump rise in my throat. So I stayed in my room, windows open, guitar resting on my lap, strings untouched. One day, maybe a week after everything, I found a game case Trent had borrowed and returned without saying anything. It sat on my bookshelf like it always had. Only this time, something stuck out. A folded scrap of paper tucked behind the insert. I unfolded it with shaking hands. I never had the guts to want you out loud. I don't know if that makes me a coward or just human. No name, no signature, just those two sentences. I sat on the floor for a long time, rereading them, over and over. Part of me felt cracked, wide open. Part of me felt like screaming. He had wanted something, maybe not in the way I hoped, maybe not enough to stay, but it hadn't been in my head. Still, he left. I didn't reply, didn't text him. What would I say? That I forgave him? That I still wanted him? That he broke something I hadn't even known was fragile? Instead, I started writing music again. Not lyrics, not at first, just chords. Gentle, aching melodies that filled the silence he left behind. I never told Colby. I never would. That betrayal was mine to carry, and Trent had already disappeared into the cracks of someone else's life. Sometimes I wondered if he thought of me, if he regretted it, if he'd ever find the courage to want someone out loud. But wondering didn't change anything. What happened between us didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like a lesson, a kind of growing pain I hadn't been prepared for. It taught me how fast a person could change shape in your life, how someone who felt like home could become a ghost overnight. Sometimes I still walked past the basement door and felt the echo of him there. The laughter, the long silences, the brush of his knee against mine. And though I tried not to, I missed him. Not just the version that kissed me, but the version that sat beside me eating chips, laughing at stupid movies, telling me I mattered without ever having to say it. Maybe that version of him was real. Maybe it wasn't. But he was the first person who ever made me feel seen, even if he didn't stay.